Hello, this is Jackie Cohen, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Monday, June 1st issue of the Democrat and Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Wanted, guard to be first line of defense in a shooting. Pay $18 an hour. Security guards face heightened risks without recognition. On average, they make $18 an hour. Many are required to provide their own body armor. And if a gunman bursts through the door of a church, store, or government office, they're relied on to confront intruders hell-bent on wreaking deadly consequences. That's the unspoken job description for a private security guard in the United States. The nation's more than 1.2 million private security personnel are nearly twice the country's estimated 700,000 police officers, but often melt into the scenery as people go about their daily lives. As uniformed fixtures at banks, hospitals, schools, retail stores, apartment complexes, and municipal buildings, their sometimes vague or questionable presence has made some of them objects of ridicule, as rendered in the 2009 film Paul Blart Mall Cop. Yet, in a culture plagued by mass shootings, security guards work the front lines with little fanfare, charged with tackling what the job can demand in a worst-case scenario. On May 18th, a security guard was among 3 people killed at the Islamic Center of San Diego, praised by police for his actions in preventing what could have been a greater tragedy. Security officers can be invisible until the moment it matters most, said Mark Hiel, CEO of Protos Security, a security firm headquartered in Norwalk, Connecticut. You're staying vigilant for the one moment when someone's coming into a building, and that's a very difficult thing to do. Across the country, states like Louisiana, Maryland, and Pennsylvania are pushing for laws to enhance security guards' safety, training, and legal protections. New York City, where about 60,000 private security officers are employed, this year passed the Allende Etienne Safety and Security Act, guaranteeing better wages, benefits, and time off for them. The act is named for a security guard who was killed in a mass shooting in July in the lobby of a Park Avenue office building. Security guards are the true first responders, said Robert C. Smith, CEO of Nightlife Security Consultants, a San Diego-based security training program focused on the hospitality industry. Who's on the scene when a stabbing or a shooting takes place? They don't often get the limelight, but they're there day in and day out, and their number one priority is to keep you safe. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, though security guards experience injury rates comparable with those in other jobs, their fatality rate is more than double that of the average employee. Assaults are most often the reason, and most of them happen in the evening and early morning hours. Nightclub security guards, for instance, often face volatile situations. On May 10th, Dominique Coleman, a 38-year-old security guard at an after-hours club in Fort Worth, Texas, was shot and killed when he confronted club patrons outside, 3 days after 28-year-old security guard Jordan Jones was shot to death after breaking up a fight at a bar in Ackworth, Georgia. In October, security guard Amos Gary, 54, was among 4 people killed in a shooting outside a bar and grill on St. Helena Island in South Carolina. Manny Marquez, Nightlife Security Consultants' chief operating officer, said the role of security guards is sometimes underappreciated even by the business owners who hire them. Security operations for a hospitality venue are often at the bottom of the priority list, he said. It's not the sexy part of the business. It's not the latest cocktail or menu item. Security guards are basically a line item on a profit-loss statement, and they don't get the attention they deserve. For some security guards, pay barely covers needs. With police retention and recruitment perennial issues for law enforcement, businesses and municipalities, such as Portland, Oregon, and Santa Fe, New Mexico, are turning to private security to fill the gap, according to a study by researchers at Duke University and the University of Chicago. Reports suggest the presence of security guards in public spaces may deter crime, but most don't carry weapons and lack a police officer's authority to issue citations or make arrests. Their average wage is roughly half of that of police officers, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, often without the accompanying pensions and legal protections. Nearly 3/4 work in investigation and security services, the Bureau said, and many others are found at retailer outlets, hospitals, and schools. Security guards also provide a crucial presence at arts and sports venues, casinos, banks, bars, and nightclubs. Wages vary widely. An allied universal armed officer position in Chicago for veterans and retired law enforcement starts at $28 an hour. Universal is among the biggest of such firms, with some 770,000 employees in 100 countries. An aero security posting at a Connecticut synagogue starts at $55 an hour. In the Bay Area, however, 80% of private security guards don't earn enough to meet basic living needs, according to a study released in April by the University of California, Berkeley. The state's private security guards earn $20 an hour on average. Some make as little as $14.85 an hour, and nearly half are considered low-wage workers. David Kay said desperation led him to work for several years as a security guard in San Francisco. In 2020, he lost his tech support job and spent 3 months in a hospital battling COVID-19. With crippling medical bills piling up, Kay was forced to give up his home and live in Airbnbs. Several friends had worked as guards and told him companies were always hiring. Kay needed a steady paycheck, and after 8 hours of training, he began work as an unarmed guard for private Bay Area companies. One role had him monitor a generator outside a hospital that had been stripped of its copper wiring. Kay eventually rose to a supervisory role, but the pay barely covered his living expenses. He made $22 an hour as an entry-level guard and $28 as a supervisor. In the world of private security, more pay often comes with more risk. When Kay's manager asked if he wanted to become an armed guard for a few more dollars an hour, he immediately declined. "I don't want to be in a situation where I need a gun," he said. "My life is not worth an extra $40 a day." In the line of fire. Still, unarmed guards can pay the price. Among the victims in the past 2 years: February 2026, Sunday, July 22nd. February 2026, Sunjun July 22, who was working in the overnight security shift at a hotel in Oklahoma City while saving up for dental school, was killed when a pistol was fired during a fight among teens he had escorted out of the lobby. April 2025, Eddie Shedd, 39, a deacon and head of security at a church in Gulfport, Mississippi, was shot and killed while intervening in a domestic dispute after a church Easter gathering. February 2025, Ivan Diaz Jr., 32, a nightclub security guard in Allentown, Pennsylvania, was shot to death while trying to de-escalate an altercation inside the club. January 2025, Jesus Loera, 45, was killed while preventing an armed person from entering the Honduran consulate in Doraville, Georgia. In Buffalo, New York, on May 14, 2022, security guard Aaron Salter Jr., 55, was armed when danger arrived at the Tops supermarket where he worked. The retired police officer was walking a customer outside when an 18-year-old white supremacist inspired by the perpetrator of the March 2019 massacre of 51 people at 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, approached the store with a semi-automatic rifle. Salter engaged the gunman, then ran inside to warn customers before being shot and killed. At his memorial, Buffalo Police Commissioner Joseph Gramaglia praised Salter for giving staff and customers inside precious seconds to escape to the back of the store. Because of that, he said, people survived. Motivated to serve as protector. Half a world away in California, the Christchurch massacre had spurred another person to action. Amin Abdallah, the archery enthusiast and father of 8, decided to become a security guard after the incident, taking a job at the Islamic Center of San Diego. Even if it was a quiet day, he was on alert and ready, said Meta Gutierrez, a former school administrator at the center. Abdullah was ready on May 18th when 2 gun-wielding extremist teens, also apparently driven by the Christchurch killings, rushed past the center's security checkpoint that day. He opened fire, radioing teachers amid the melee to lock their doors and get the school's 140 kids into hiding places. Abdullah continued firing, forcing the skirmish outside before being shot. By the time the shooters re-entered the building, the classrooms were empty, and the 2 fled to a nearby neighborhood before taking their own lives. Said San Diego Police Chief Scott Wall of Abdullah, his actions were heroic. Rabbi Jen Lader of Temple Israel outside Detroit was in the nation's capital promoting legislation to boost security funding for religious spaces when she learned of the attack. It revived memories of another attack earlier this year at Temple Israel, where a gunman rammed a truck into the synagogue and tried to storm the building with 140 students inside. Authorities said he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound amid a firefight with security officers. When you're hiring someone to sit at the front desk, you don't think you're asking them to lay down their life for you, but that's what it is, Lader said. You're hiring people who are literally tasked with putting themselves between you and the bad guy. Hiel, of Connecticut's Protos Security, said the environment has become increasingly complex in recent years amid unpredictable behavior driven by mental health struggles and radicalization. An industry once focused on physical deterrence now requires judgment and situational awareness. It puts more pressure on security officers, Hiel said. Houses of worship rely more on security guards. Meanwhile, the San Diego attack has prompted religious and advocacy groups to call for increased protection at places of worship, which have found such approaches work. In December 2019, 2 volunteer security members at the West Freeway Church of Christ in suburban Fort Worth, Texas, drew weapons and fatally shot a man who had entered a crowded church with a shotgun, killing 2 before volunteers stopped the attack. In June 2025, armed security guards at Cross Point Community Church in suburban Detroit shot and disarmed a 31-year-old man in tactical gear who attacked the church during a youth service. In Washington, D.C., Shiloh Baptist Church has relied for years on deacons and volunteers to screen people entering the building. But with shootings and attacks on houses of worship on the rise, the church now intends to station armed, plainclothes security guards at entrances and in the parking lot. We don't want to look like a police state, but we want to ensure the safety of our congregation, Church Security Director Rick Coleman said. Bill Ganley, Community Security Director for the Jewish Federation of San Diego, said Jewish institutions rely on security guards and volunteer teams to identify potential threats and make split-second decisions in those critical moments before emergency responders arrive. The fact that people are willing to attack based on their hate is something that these security officers know they may have to face, he said. At Faith Chapel, a Christian church in eastern San Diego County, security practices have evolved over time to meet the growing dangers. Letitia Riordan, the church's security lead, said the ministry has shifted from a reactive approach to a more proactive one. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Democrat and Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Preparations for the church's safety team of about 15 volunteers and several armed guards include scenario-based training using real-world cases. The goal is to make rehearsed situations feel realistic and allow team members to remain training-focused under pressure. When we train and train and train, we kind of are able to take the emotion part out of it, Riordan said. Mike Harville, who runs security at a megachurch in Detroit, hires outside firms to lead de-escalation training and active shooter drills. Recent vehicle ramming attacks have prompted church plans to install bollards near the entrance and large boulders on the lawn, he said. Harville, 65, who joined the security team after a corporate retail and banking career, said that while gunmen present the ultimate threat, more common scenarios are domestic confrontations, mental health crises, and medical emergencies. What he seeks in volunteers is what he calls a sheepdog's heart. We want people who are protectors, somebody who wants to step in and intervene if something happens. We teach that you can't wait. How guards are required to respond to violent attacks is a gray area, experts said. Most private security guards are hired to observe and report suspicious behavior, while letting law enforcement deal with the illegal activity. Though licensed guards can carry a gun, they often don't have more authority to use deadly force than an ordinary citizen. For the most part, the firearm is really only there as a visual deterrent, said Mike Andrus, founder of the Florida-based security firm Safe Day Services. Security guards, Andrus said, are generally trained to de-escalate confrontations and use firearms only as a last resort to protect themselves or others. There's no national standard, he said, so training, standards, and orders vary widely depending on the state and company employing the guard. The 1999 mass shootings at Columbine High School in Colorado redefined law enforcement response to such incidents, moving to prevent what the FBI calls dire eventualities by recommending first responders immediately neutralize an attacker rather than establish a perimeter while awaiting SWAT units or negotiators, which had been standard practice. That's what can make security guards so pivotal, said Smith and Marquez of San Diego's nightlife security consultants. The sooner a shooter is engaged by someone with a plan, they said, the more lives will be saved. Our training teaches them to engage, but not to blindly become a hero and jump in there and take bullets, Smith said. With training, you can get the upper hand on getting someone's gun. We teach that you can't wait. If you control the weapon, you control the shooter. Through the maxim, run, hide, fight, has developed in response to rising numbers of mass shootings, we don't just talk about the run and hide part, Smith said. Guards are there to stop and prevent problems. That sort of grounding, Marquez said, was evident in Abdullah's actions in the San Diego mosque attack. He understood that he was in harm's way, Marquez said, but it goes back to training. He had to engage, and he paid for it with his life. Funding package a boost for cities. New York City lands billions, Rochester to get $35 million. Governor Kathy Hochul and the legislature finally passed a $268 billion state budget late on May 27th. Nearly 2 months after its April 1st deadline, the budget includes policy changes ranging from immigration and customs enforcement limitations and auto insurance reforms to alterations to the state's climate law and Tier 6 pension system. On the budget's financial side, New York City will receive nearly $30 billion, and other municipalities across the state will collectively receive around $1 billion. Hochul touted these achievements in downtown Albany on May 28th, saying this state assistance is important for both the Big Apple and all cities across the state. Many of them have seen a loss of federal dollars, Hochul said. It's about giving them a helping hand at this time when many are really in trouble. Since the governor took office, state support for municipalities outside New York City has increased 60%, according to Hochul's office. However, the total budget spending has grown each year, increasing by nearly $50 billion since her first state budget passing as governor in 2022. New York City is receiving more than $28 billion in the state budget this year, which includes funding toward universal child care efforts, $1.5 billion to help close the city's more than $5 billion budget gap, and $500 million in revenue through pied-à-terre tax on city second homes. Hochul's office has provided the following breakdown. $202 million in actions to offset recurring spending obligations, $150 million in additional school aid, $3.163 billion through state authorization of other savings measures, including $2.294 billion in pension restructuring, $361 million in other actions, $508 million in class size flexibility. Around $1 billion will be divided among municipalities outside of New York City. Buffalo and Albany have noted sizable budget gaps and leaned on the state in recent months to help them dig out. Here's how much several cities are receiving in temporary municipal assistance and extra assistance in the state budget this year. Buffalo, $70 million. Yonkers, $55 million. Albany, $44.4 million. Rochester, $35 million. Syracuse, $35 million. Mount Vernon, $12.5 million. Some criticize growth of state budget spending under Hochul. Throughout this year's budget process and in years past, Hochul and Albany Democrats have received heavy criticism of how much is being spent. Assembly Minority Leader Ed Rah said this year's budget represents a complete lack of fiscal responsibility. Nearly 2 months after the April 1st deadline, pencils are finally down on a staggering $268 billion budget, $14 billion more than last year, Rah added. Since 2021, New York's budget has grown by more than $90 billion, yet runaway spending hasn't translated into improved quality of life. And Senate Majority Leader Rob Ortt says the budget failed miserably on fiscal responsibility. Instead of addressing the issues that matter most to hardworking taxpayers, Albany Democrats remain focused on spending more of your money on giveaways, freebies, and politically driven handouts that do little to help the vast majority of New Yorkers struggling to make ends meet, Ortt added. Hochul responded to some of those assertions, pointing to her fiscal watchdog State Budget Director Blake Washington and saying he will not let this get out of control. As you know, we had to take on additional costs because Washington withheld $10 billion from us with H.R. 1, Hochul said, referring to the so-called Big Beautiful Bill package of tax and spending cuts passed last year by Republicans in Congress and the Trump administration. We are managing our money well by being able to expand programs, but also not have to put one more burden on New Yorkers' backs. In fact, a lot of this is to take a lot of the costs off their backs and to put more money back in their pockets. Millions for upstate public transit. The state budget includes millions in transit funding for upstate communities. New York State Operating Assistance will receive an additional $5 million, totaling $374.5 million in funding for upstate New York transit systems, like Rochester's Regional Transit Service, in part to help secure more frequent and efficient routes. Rochester-Genesee Regional Transportation Authority will receive $4 million to expand into Yates County without impacting existing services in Monroe County. Through the Consolidated Local Street and Highway Improvement Program, $50 million will be allocated to repairs and upkeep of local roads and bridges. New Yorkers to get gas-electric rebates. More than 8 million New Yorkers will receive rebate checks of up to $200 to cover the costs of rising gas and electric bills. The 2027 state budget, adopted May 27th, includes $1 billion in checks for full-time residents. The money will be distributed based on income levels for the 2024 tax year. Governor Kathy Hochul used a May 28th press conference in Albany to tout the reforms and to take a poke at President Donald Trump and spineless enablers who have spent money on a huge garish ballroom while ignoring New Yorkers struggling to pay rising gas and electric bills. "Your family is my fight," Hochul said. "I've lived through this experience. You try to get ahead and it feels like the bills keep piling up." At the end of April, over 1.1 million New Yorkers were behind at least 3 months on gas and electric bills, with nearly $2 billion owed. Final shutoff notices were sent to 460,000 New Yorkers in April, and 51,000 had their service turned off for non-payment, state records show. Here's a breakdown of the rebate checks. Joint filers with incomes under $150,000 will get $200 checks. Joint filers with incomes between $150,000 and $300,000 get $150. Single filers with incomes under $150,000 get $100. Checks will go out between September and December in the form of a tax refund. The rebates headline a series of energy affordability measures included in a state budget that arrived weeks late. Hochul also signed off on a number of measures state lawmakers hope will give ratepayers greater leverage arguing their case before the state's Public Service Commission. Among them, increased scrutiny of executive compensation packages for CEOs of private utilities that would link salary to energy affordability goals outlined by state regulators. Preventing utility companies from sticking ratepayers with the tab for what they spend on lobbying, political donations, and luxury travel. The creation of a blue ribbon commission to study the causes of rising rates and recommendations for reductions. Allowing rate cases to last for 14 months, which would give advocates and lawmakers more time to review rate increases. Consumer advocates like the AARP and the Public Utility Law Project have been pressing the governor and state lawmakers for the reforms. On May 28th, the AARP praised the governor for adopting a two-pronged approach, offering strapped ratepayers immediate relief in the form of rebates, while pursuing a long-term strategy to recalibrate a regulatory system they say is tilted in favor of utilities. The AARP believes the energy rate-setting process at the PSC is broken, said Bill Ferris, AARP's New York legislative lobbyist. It has been broken for a while, and we're seeing the results of that with higher rates from all utilities. Ferris said the Blue Ribbon Commission should clear the path for an open dialogue with residential customers, since it will not include representatives from utilities and energy companies. In January, the AARP issued a report that found the state's utilities billed ratepayers for the $32 million they spent on lawyers, consultants, and expert witnesses to argue rates cases before the PSC. There's no reason why an international energy company should pass on their lobbying costs in New York's capital to ratepayers, Ferris said. It just shouldn't happen. Energy proposals that didn't make it into the New York state budget. The per-family energy rebate checks of up to $200 came in lower than some state lawmakers had hoped. Democrats proposed checks of up to $500, while Republicans were seeking up to $400 in rebates depending on income level. Also not in the final budget was over $2 billion to create a state office for the utility consumer advocate. Far too many families have been forced to simply get by, while costs continue to rise and affordability feels further out of reach, Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins said. This budget is about changing that, lowering bills, expanding opportunity, and addressing New Yorkers' desire to get ahead, not just get by. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Democrat and Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Pentagon spars with SpaceX over pricing. As U.S. kamikaze drones guided by Elon Musk's Starlink network began to make visible gains in the war against Iran, senior SpaceX officials reached a conclusion. The Pentagon should be paying more for access to their satellite Wi-Fi network. Within weeks of the United States launching its bombing campaign, SpaceX executives met Pentagon officials and argued the military had been paying about $5,000 for connection per terminal, while effectively using a higher tier of service worth closer to $25,000, according to two sources familiar with the matter and Pentagon documents reviewed by Reuters. The disagreement over Starlink's use on Lucas suicide drones is part of increasing tensions between SpaceX and the Pentagon over Starlink pricing in recent months, according to interviews with 5 people familiar with the matter and the documents. The Pentagon, which is seeking to help Iranian citizens bypass government-imposed communications blackouts, has also been at odds with SpaceX over pricing for a plan to provide the populace direct-to-cell connections with Starlink akin to 5G service, 2 of the sources said. The ongoing disputes underscore how the Pentagon's growing reliance on SpaceX is handing Musk greater leverage over a critical layer of U.S. national security, at a time when SpaceX is seeking to boost revenue ahead of an IPO in June that could be among the biggest in history. Unlike consumer Starlink terminals available at stores, SpaceX sells a military-specific version called Starshield to the Pentagon under a 2023 agreement. Starshield terminals can connect to both commercial Starlink satellites and a separate, more secure constellation, also called Starshield, according to a person familiar with the matter. SpaceX argued the Lucas drones were operating under conditions that aligned more closely with its aviation tier subscription rather than a lower-priced land or mobility service. Pentagon officials argued that the $25,000 price tag, a monthly fee, was designed for aircraft, not kamikaze drones that used Starlink connection for a matter of minutes or hours, according to one of the sources. The Pentagon, which was ramping up strikes on Iran, ultimately agreed to pay SpaceX's proposed price increase, almost doubling the cost of each Lucas drone. The Pentagon was initially paying about $30,000 per unit. SpaceX didn't respond to a comment request. The Pentagon declined to comment on Reuters reporting that SpaceX increased its pricing, its decision to pay, or the plan to provide Iranian citizens with Starlink cell service. In a statement, a Pentagon official said the office responsible for acquiring the terminals, the Commercial Starlight Communications Office, is working to find other competitors. The Department of War is committed to fostering a competitive environment for commercial satellite communications, an official said. After the Reuters story was published, Musk calls it false, without elaborating in a post on X. He added that the civilian Starlink system had been improperly used for military purposes. In a separate post, he said the company was at fault, not the Pentagon. A spokesperson for SpectreWorks, which makes the Lucas drone, directed all questions to the Pentagon. In a post on X, Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell said Reuters reporting was wrong without providing further information. SpaceX remains a strong and valued partner to the Department of War, he wrote. But no other company provides a comparable alternative to Starlink, which has become an increasingly critical tool in modern warfare since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The satellite network provides global coverage, enabling battlefield communications and precision targeting even in remote areas. SpaceX's constellation of roughly 10,000 satellites accounts for more than 60% of those in orbit, dwarfing the constellations being built by other companies, including OneWeb and Amazon Leo. The risks of reliance on Starlink were first thrown into sharp focus during the Ukraine war when Musk ordered Starlink service switched off in parts of the country in 2022, as Ukrainian forces advanced on Russian positions, disrupting a key counteroffensive, Reuters previously reported. More recently, U.S. Navy tests were disrupted last summer when a global Starlink outage cut off connection to uncrewed military boats, leaving them bobbing in the ocean. SpaceX has government over a barrel. Unlike traditional defense contractors, SpaceX holds greater leverage over the Pentagon because it also has a large commercial market for Starlink, alongside its rocket launch and artificial intelligence businesses, said Clayton Swope, a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a national security-focused think tank. SpaceX generates about 20% of its total revenue from the U.S. government, according to an SEC filing. SpaceX certainly has the U.S. government over a barrel, Swope said. At the outset of the Iran war, Starlink was already a core part of U.S. military operations. In testing and early deployments, it supported a range of systems, from aerial attack drones such as the Lucas to uncrewed surface vessels used for maritime surveillance and strike missions. When the United States launched its bombing campaign, Starshield terminals were being used across more than a dozen drone systems, according to a source familiar with the matter. But tensions between the Pentagon and SpaceX emerged quickly after the United States launched its February 28th assault on Iran. On March 1st, Musk responded on X to a user's post featuring an image of the Lucas drone that said it appears to have an integrated Starlink terminal. It is a violation of commercial Starlink terms of service to use the terminal for weapons systems. This applies to all users and is shut down when discovered, Musk posted. There is a separate network called Starshield, which is operated by the U.S. government. The Pentagon official, in a statement to Reuters, denied any violation of its agreement with SpaceX. In the days that followed, SpaceX executives met Pentagon officials and argued the military was underpaying for the service, two sources familiar with the matter said. Although the Pentagon initially agreed to the higher fee for satellite Wi-Fi connections used by attack drones, senior officials, including Deputy Secretary of War Steve Feinberg, remained uneasy about the arrangement, one of the sources said. Pentagon officials, during an April ceasefire, met to revisit the pricing with Terrence O'Shaughnessy, a retired four-star Air Force general who now leads SpaceX's defense business. Still, the Pentagon is currently considering an additional purchase of more than 3,500 Starshield terminal subscriptions, including 100 with the higher-priced aviation tier, according to Pentagon documents reviewed by Reuters. The deal could generate hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue for SpaceX, though Reuters could not determine whether an agreement has been finalized or what price is being discussed. SpaceX prices irk Pentagon. Starlink has also proved crucial to other operations. After Iran cracked down on protests in January, killing thousands of people, the Trump administration smuggled in more than 6,000 Starlink terminals to provide internet access to citizens, the Wall Street Journal previously reported. As the war intensified, however, Iranian authorities confiscated the terminals and deployed jamming devices across major cities to disrupt connections, according to a source familiar with the matter. Within a week of the conflict beginning, Pentagon officials began discussions with SpaceX about deploying direct-to-cell service that could bypass those disruptions, two people familiar with the matter said. The capability would allow users to connect without terminals on the ground. SpaceX, which generated $11.4 billion in revenue from Starlink in 2025, proposed charging as much as $500 million to launch the capability, along with a $100 million monthly fee to operate it, according to one of the people and Pentagon documents, prompting alarm from defense officials over the price. Reuters could not determine whether an agreement has been reached. Rivals beef over veganism claims in Texas. GOP's Paxton seizes on Tallarico's meatless meal. Nothing is more quintessentially Texas than oil derricks, longhorn cattle, and barbecue. So when James Tallarico, the Democratic nominee in the highly contested Senate race in Texas, ordered potato, egg, and cheese breakfast tacos during a visit to Taco Joint in Austin with President Barack Obama in early May, a chorus of critics chimed in with opinions about the lawmaker's meatless meal. Republicans, political pundits, Texans, and non-Texans alike. Potato, egg, and cheese? Homie is not beating the vegetarian allegations, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, a Republican, said on his campaign's X account. Tallarico's opponent, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, and his Republican allies, including President Donald Trump, are painting the Democrat as being out of touch and too radical for the Lone Star State, especially in relation to a key industry in the state, beef. He's a vegan in Texas, and you can't get elected as a vegan in Texas, Trump told reporters on May 20th. Paxton, in a May 26th speech after winning the GOP runoff, gave his Democratic opponent the nickname Tofu Tofu Tallarico, and again accused him of being vegan. It's hard to imagine someone more radical than that, Paxton said. Some of Tallarico's critics have been ripping on his masculinity, referencing his support for the LGBTQ+ community, along with the purportedly unmanly notion of having, at one time, eschewed meat. Tallarico has denied that he's a vegan, and his egg, potato, and cheese taco order is not a vegan meal because it contains animal products. He's also, clearly, not afraid of going head-to-head with Paxton, who in recent years has been both impeached by his colleagues in the legislature and indicted by his fellow Texas lawyers. I'm an 8th-generation Texan. I've been eating barbecue sauce before Ken Paxton's first indictment, Tallarico said May 26th on the Midas Touch podcast. And if all they have on me is lying about me being a vegan, I feel pretty good about our chances this November. So how did the vegan rumor get started? For a long stretch, even before Tallarico's viral taco order earlier in May, Republicans have recirculated remarks he made in 2022 about eating meat. While speaking to the Texas Human Legislative Network, a nonprofit that lobbies for animal welfare, in April 2022, Tallarico said he was reducing his meat consumption as part of climate-related efforts. I am proud to say that our campaign has officially become a non-meat campaign, he said at the time. We are only buying vegan products from our local vegan businesses. Senator Ted Cruz, a Republican, shared those remarks on X on March 17th, saying, "Watch, this freak wants to ban barbecue. That's not Texas." Cornyn also shared a clip of the remarks on March 17th. Vote Republican this November. The stakes couldn't be higher, Cornyn wrote, in a knowing play on the word stakes. That same month, Tallarico's campaign spokesperson, J.T. Ennis, issued an official response on his boss's behalf, sharing a photo of Tallarico taking a large bite of a massive turkey leg while wearing a button-down with a Texas flag design. Campaign videos and photos since then have shown him eating barbecue, chicken, and steak in stops across the state. If he had been watching his meat intake, the message seemed to be, he certainly wasn't any longer. Texas's deep ties to cattle ranching, beef, and agriculture mean comments about meat consumption likely carry more political weight there than in many other states. Texas leads the nation in cattle production, with more than 12 million head of cattle and calves, according to the Texas Department of Agriculture. That accounts for roughly 15% of U.S. cattle production. It's more than double the herd population of Kansas and California, the states with the next largest inventories, which each reported fewer than 6 million head in the latest census data. The significance of beef in Texas extends well beyond economics and cuisine. Historians often describe Texas's barbecue culture as a reflection of the state's layered demographic history, traditions brought by communities that shaped Texas over generations. German and Czech immigrants who settled in central Texas during the 1800s introduced meat smoking and butcher shop traditions that later became foundational to what many now recognize as classic Texas barbecue, according to the Texas Historical Association. Mexican and Tejano traditions influenced barbacoa and slow-cooked meats across the south of the state. Black pitmasters helped shape Eastern Texas barbecue traditions, contributing techniques, flavors, and restaurant traditions that spread throughout the state. In West Texas, ranching culture and open-flame cooking developed into cowboy barbecue. Over time, those influences blended into a distinct food culture tied to family gatherings, church events, county fairs, football games, political campaigning, and rural identity. Real-life ranching operations, such as the King Ranch and the Four Sixes Ranch, have become cultural brands of their own. Events, such as the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, and destinations like the Fort Worth Stockyards, draw millions through celebrations of Texas cattle ranching heritage. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Democrat and Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. More Americans dropping or terminated from ACA. More Americans are dropping out or being kicked off the Affordable Care Act health insurance for non-payment than in past years, according to data through April from half a dozen states that sell the plans themselves. The cancellations are posing a political liability for President Donald Trump and the Republican Party ahead of November midterm elections, expected to turn on affordability. Kentucky and Idaho stand out. In Kentucky, 3 times the number of people canceled or were dropped from their coverage, while in Idaho, enrollment shrank by 24,402, compared to a loss of 15,866 members during the same time frame a year earlier. About 23 million people signed up for or were automatically re-enrolled in 2026 health insurance plans created by President Barack Obama's Affordable Care Act, a decline of 5% from 2025. The decline was largely due to the end of extra subsidies created during the COVID-19 pandemic to help people keep their coverage. Without subsidies, premiums rose by an average of 114% to $1,905 annually, according to data from health policy research group KFF. Consumers are being exposed to the actual unsubsidized cost of these premiums and are choosing to leave the marketplace, said Matt McGough, a policy analyst at KFF. The U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which oversees the ACA and runs healthcare.gov for about 30 states, did not respond to requests for comment. Affordability of health insurance is a top issue for voters, and its impact will increase as the year goes on, like a gathering storm, said Jonathan Oberlander, a professor of health policy at the University of North Carolina School of Medicine. Polling from KFF shows that affordable health care remains atop the list of public worries, tied with concerns over surging gasoline and transportation costs stemming from the U.S.-Israeli war with Iran. More than 3/4 of independent voters being courted by both parties say healthcare costs will affect their decision to vote and which party's candidate they support in November. Total ACA enrollment likely fell between 17% and 26% through March, according to Wakely Consulting Group, a health insurance consulting firm that analyzed premium payment data representing about 80% of the ACA individual market. Wakely said over 14% of enrollees did not pay their January premium, in line with a March KFF survey that found about 15% of enrollees had not paid their premiums, largely due to higher costs. Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Mexico said thousands of consumers either failed to pay their first premium or lost coverage in the early months of the year due to missed payments. Most states and the federal government allow a grace period of 90 days or more for non-payment. In Kentucky, between January and April, 15,067 people who selected 2026 plans had lost coverage due to non-payment, up from 5,034 disenrollments for the same period last year. The state also saw an 8.5% decrease in overall enrollment in January, a spokesperson for Kentucky's Cabinet for Health and Family Services said. Some states, like Colorado, were able to provide state-based support that helped ease affordability and terminations, said McGough, while Idaho and Kentucky did not. Colorado had a 2% drop in enrollment, as did Pennsylvania. Michael Eberly, executive director at Maryland's Health Benefit Exchange, said enrollment has fallen by 8% and that over 60% of people who disenrolled cited increased or unmanageable costs. Jill Biden reveals oddly friendly Trump message. Donald Trump had repeatedly denounced Joe Biden as the worst president in American history, calling him dumb and demented during one of the nation's most bitter campaigns for the White House. Yet in her new book, View from the East Wing, former First Lady Jill Biden describes an oddly friendly farewell from the 47th president at the 2025 inauguration, moments after he had been sworn in to succeed her husband. She says, after it was over and official, the new president said to me, "If Joe ever needs anything, call me." Much of the coverage of Jill Biden's memoir, being published June 2nd by Gallery Books, has focused on her account of watching her husband falter in the presidential debate against Trump. Joe Biden's catastrophic performance led to his withdrawal as the Democratic candidate 3 weeks later. But there are other insights in her 275-page book. Among the takeaways, awkward small talk. There had been no discordant bonhomie in the ride to the Capitol that day on January 20th, 2025. As custom dictated, the outgoing and incoming First Ladies shared an official car as they rode from the White House to the inauguration. Jill Biden and Melania Trump had rarely spoken in the past. Fortunately, Jill Biden writes, their formal escort to the inauguration was John Besant, a law professor and the husband of Senator Amy Klobuchar, Democrat of Minnesota, who chaired the bipartisan committee that planned the event. He seemed to have arrived with a long mental list of safe topics. "Where's Barron in school?" he began, as Melania responded with short answers. Besant was undeterred. Where did Barron live? Was he having fun? Did they have a dog? Where did she grow up in Slovenia? Then the 2-mile journey was over. Bad news after debate. As Joe Biden resisted calls to withdraw from the presidential race, there was speculation that he was being shielded from bad news. That wasn't accurate, his wife says. Joe was obsessed with his iPhone and the Apple News feed, and his algorithm was selecting the worst of the worst, she writes. He was constantly watching Fox. There was no bubble of delusional optimism, as critics charged, she says. He was being deluged with news every day. Nearly all of it was bad. View from the East Wing. 9 months after Jill Biden moved out of the White House, construction crews tore down the East Wing to make way for Trump's big, beautiful ballroom festooned with gold. She recounted the history of the architectural elements that were lost, including some put in place by Thomas Jefferson and Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt. The social offices, gutted. The military office, flattened. What had been my office, gone, she says. A major landmark and historic treasure was being treated like an extreme fixer-upper on HGTV's Property Brothers. After 4 years in the White House, she laments, the loss felt personal. Free summer concerts back at Ontario Beach Park. Nick and the Nice Guys will kick off Wegmans Concerts by the Shore at 7 p.m. Wednesday, June 3rd at Ontario Beach Park. The series will continue through August at 7 p.m. every Wednesday except for July 8th, when the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra will perform at 7:30 p.m. Admission is free. The schedule is June 3rd, Nick and the Nice Guys, show band. June 10th, Claudia Heuser, country. June 17th, the Sky Coasters, party band. June 24th, Linda Rutherford and Celtic Fire, Celtic music. July 1st, Atlas, funky dance music. July 8th, RPO. July 15th, La Nueva Sequencia, Latin. July 22nd, The Real News, Lizzo to Zeppelin. July 29th, Ignite Reggae, Reggae. August 5th, Indigo Breeze, Ellington to Mangione. August 12th, The Dukes, 1960s and 70s R&B. August 19th, Allegro, party band. August 26th, The Uptown Groove, hits through the ages. For information on this and other events organized by the Ontario Beach Park Program Committee, including Jazz at the Beach, go to ontariobeachentertainment.org. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Monday, June 1st issue of the Democrat Chronicle. Your reader has been Jackie Cohen. Thank you for listening.